My name is Tong, and I'm here today to tell you about crowdfunded microfinance. This is a paper joined with Tse-Chun, who's my supervisor. I'm a PhD student on the job market this year. This paper is so the panel is about fighting climate change with Fintech, but you will see that the paper is not exactly fighting climate change. It's going to be about other social issues, but the platform in general, the empirical platform that we're talking about, can also speak to how to do green products. So it's going to be off a tangent compared to the previous two papers, but hopefully we can deliver more or less the same message that how Fintech can help to tackle some of the social issues that are not pecuniary. So the research question of the paper is what happens when microfinance institutions received crowdfunding capital to improve financial inclusion. So you see that instead of climate-related issues, this is about financial inclusion. And for those who are unfamiliar with the microfinance literature, the microfinance institutions, the MFIs, are basically local, bank-like institutions in developing economies around the world. So they are responsible for getting access to those rural population with really low access to financial services. They serve the function of a bank, and they can sometimes take deposits. So you can think about those as local bank partners with this crowdfunding platform. So the paper is going to about a series of shocks that partner these local MFIs with a crowdfunded platform to receive crowdfunding capital from funders around the world. And the paper is going to analyze how or what happens after this capital injection, more specifically in two questions. The first one is, do these MFIs expand their outreach to underserved demographics? And question number two is, what are the costs of doing that, if there's any cost? Right. So before moving on, is there a particular reason why we think crowdfunding is particularly promising in promoting financial inclusion? I think on the Wednesday keynote speech, right, there are two discussions about whether financial inclusion is actually useful, right? So, and whether, crowdfunding, why does crowdfunding have anything to do with financial inclusion? Crowdfunding has potential because bank funding is specialized and sometimes they are misaligned with consumer preferences. So if you think about a traditional, a conventional bank who are profit maximizing, they do not really care about whether you are doing a very inclusive loan or you are doing a more conventional loan that does not have financial inclusion in mind. However, you can find consumers around the world, crowdfunders in our case, that are more aware of this issue and they have more aligned preferences with financial inclusion. So if you think about a status quo where the banks and the consumers are separated, they have misaligned preferences. And now crowdfunding is a mechanism to say that, hey, we now have the financiers and the consumers having more aligned preferences, which can reduce the misalignment. And by making consumers to become banks, you can pick up projects that have low NPVs, net present values, but are socially desirable, or at least desirable to those crowdfunders. And in this context, we're talking about crowdfunders who care about financial inclusion, right? So instead of a profit maximizing conventional bank who's speaking NPVs, we are substituting those banks with crowdfunders that have a higher awareness of issues like financial inclusion. And if you will, you can find another group of crowdfunders who are more aware of climate changes. And the idea is to reduce the misalignment of preferences between the financiers and the consumers. So, very briefly about how to sort of understand this thing in a graph. So if you focus on the lower left triangle, which is what intermediary funding can really do, and alpha, the x-axis, is basically the amount of profits, percentage of profits the bank can get from any project. And you can think about if the bank, or if the entrepreneur gets all of the surplus, then the bank would fund nothing. If the bank gets all of the surplus, then it will fund the optimal amount of projects. So before crowdfunding is introduced, if there is only conventional banks, then only the lower left triangle is going to be funded. But if you take the social planner's perspective, right, anything below V should be funded because they are cost effective. So the upper right triangle is not funded due to the misalignment of preferences or incentives between the banks and the consumers. And now, what crowdfunding can ideally achieve is to say, hey, I now allow consumers to become the financiers, which means that we allow them to have enough resources so that they can actually fund those things that they prefer. And they don't have to go through the intermediary of a profit maximizing bank who may have a different set of preferences and incentives. So that's, in a very, very stylized theoretical model, how we should understand the appeal of crowdfunding over conventional intermediary funding. Okay, so before we move on to that, I understand that this is largely inspired by the keynotes on Wednesday, right? So they are debating about whether financial inclusion is a good thing. And this paper does not take a stance on that. We do not take a stance on whether financial inclusion is a good thing or bad thing. We just state that financial inclusion is a taste, it's a personal preference. And if certain types of consumers and crowdfunders have that preference, we analyze whether they can successfully exert that preference by going through microfinance institutions. We do not take a stance on whether financial inclusion is good or bad, right? So I was inspired by beers here, right? So depends on who you ask, they will say beer is a good thing or a bad thing, right? Good for taste, bad maybe excessively for your health, right? But we are not taking a stance on that. We're just saying that if somebody actually prefers beer or financial inclusion, can they successfully manage to get what they want via this partnership between the crowdfunding platform and microfinance institutions around the world? So that's our research question. Just a brief clarification before we move on. Our research question is about whether crowdfunding microfinance, this partnership, can exert these preferences on financial inclusion. Whether these preferences are good or bad is beyond the scope of this paper, but there are excellent summaries in very good journals. This paper in 2018 by Banerjee and co-authors, they summarize, I think, 6 randomized experiments about financial inclusion, and they provide evidence over there. So if you want more discussion on whether financial inclusion is good or bad, how effective are those, these are excellent papers to start with. So the novelty of our paper is that we identified a set of crowdfunding shocks to MFIs in developing economies and study its financial inclusion implications. So this is going to be a triple difference design. So it's going to be a partnership being the first difference, before and after being the second difference. And importantly, the third difference is going to be the take-up rate. So how much of the MFI's asset is actually being funded, or the loan portfolio is actually being funded by crowdfunders. So this is the take-up rate of this platform called Kiva. Right? So our identification is going to be sourced from this triple difference design, which the reason why this triple difference is useful, we're going to talk about that in a bit. Let's first talk about where we get the data. So there's this platform. This is a US-based nonprofit platform called Kiva. So I think it's good because we talk about the Italian app and we talk about a Chinese app, and now we have a US platform that hopefully they're related to each other. So this is, I should show you I think I have this one. So this is how it looks like. If you go to kiva.org, you see, maybe this is like I don't know, what's the name? So in China, we have Taobao. So this is like a shopping, online shopping page or a marketplace for loans. So these are people in developing economies who are trying to get access to funding for certain projects. Right? And you can check out these loans, and if you agree with their purposes and you are trying to help these people, you can lend them a small amount of money by paying with your credit card or PayPal. Right? So this is in $25 increments. So the amount is small and is typical of crowdfunding amounts. And then it's going to be the MFIs, the local banks, who administer this kind of payment and route this money to the actual entrepreneurs in these developing economies to make them and monitor their repayment of the loan. So this is a charitable crowdfunding platform that connects crowdfunders around the world who want to do something about financial inclusion and those actual necessity entrepreneurs in developing economies. So this is what the platform is trying to achieve. And this is achieved by partnering with local MFIs around the world. I basically said, so in terms of how big the platform actually is, over the course, the platform is founded in 2006. So right now it's close to, it's less than 20 years. It has facilitated over USD 2 billion in fund flow, and it has partnered with, I believe, 112 different microfinance institutions around the world. We will have a sort of a map later to see where it operates in. Briefly previewing the findings, right? So after partnering with this Kiva platform, and we look at the outcomes at the MFI level, at the local banks level, right? So in the triple difference identification, we see that these MFIs have more non-performing loans. They have higher labor costs per loan. Labor costs meaning that you have more loan officers trying to journal and monitor the repayment of those loans. So at the MFI level, you see labor costs going up. And then they have lower asset utilization rates, which means the speed at which you turn over your loan portfolio. So let's say that previously, for this amount of money, you can turn them over and extend 3 loans per year. And now that is slightly reduced, which means a reduction in operating efficiency for those MFIs. So these are the financial costs. You basically have MFIs having a lower turnover in their portfolio. They have higher labor costs per loan, and they have more non-performing loans, either measured by delinquency or default rates. So after paying those costs, the gender gap in financial inclusion narrows in these MFIs. So you can, on a high level, understand this as paying some financial costs for their social preferences. So Kiva is a platform that's really oriented in improving female financial inclusion in these loan projects. So this is the preference by the Kiva crowdfunders, and they do get to exert their preference by partnering with these local MFIs at a financial cost that we just briefly mentioned. So the effect is particularly pronounced in 4 regions that report below average female borrower shares. So this is a catching up effect. In 2 regions, South Asia and East Asia, where the female financial inclusion is already high, the effect is less pronounced over there. But in the other 4 world regions defined by the World Bank, those are the regions where we see the majority of the improvements. So a brief picture that I just promised. You can see this is fund flow from a 2020 snapshot. So these are arrows, and the thickness of the arrows indicate the crowdfunding volume. So the majority of the funds are originated from United States, some from Canada, and some from Europe. And then the destination of these funds are all over the place, right? You have a lot of MFIs in Africa, in South America, in Southeast Asia, etc. So this is a global operation, and in our sample, we actually have 112 MFIs that partnered with this platform, and we are trying to find comparable control groups that are similar in characteristics, so that we can say, hey, those are the groups that are similar but do not receive this crowdfunding partnership. So what happens afterwards? And our effect is going to be identified between these 3 groups actually. So the triple difference design. Let me check the time first. Okay, so these are the brief comparisons between this Kiva, which is the data that we are using, and other crowdfunding platforms. But in the interest of time, I'm going to skip this. So talking a little bit about how we find comparable control units for those 112 MFIs that partnered with Kiva. So we want them to be ex ante as similar as possible. So we do a thing called coarsened exact matching. So we are basically matching on 6 characteristics that is shown in the literature to predict crowdfunding partnership with Kiva. These are, growth, profitability, before partner female borrower share, the interest rate charged to their clients, and then portfolio at risk, which is a risk measure, and this is a self-sufficiency measure. So we are trying to use this approach to ensure that before the partnership, there are 2 units, one eventually partnering with Kiva and one do not, and they are as similar as possible with each other. So this treatment group is going to contain 112 MFIs, and the control group, we're going to find similar MFIs, and this coordinate exact matching is going to produce some sort of weights that we are going to use in our regression. Breakdown of those MFIs, control and treated units by countries. So you will see that we actually cover a lot of countries with either within the control group or within the treated group, we actually have a good mix of different countries that we can look at. Summary statistics, I want to bring your attention to percent of female borrowers. So you will notice that it is already high, right? Before we do anything. This is 74% are female, 67% in the control group, there are females. And the reason for that is it's very typical that it is the female entrepreneurs that cannot get access to loans and fundings in conventional bank market. Right? There is a strong preference for male clients in a conventional banking market. So it's the female entrepreneurs that have to rely on this sort of like microfinance institutions. So when we are talking about improving female financial inclusion, we are not improving from something like 20%. We are trying to say that, hey, out of like starting from already about 50% female borrower share, can we do it further and have a more concentrated mix of female entrepreneurs in the Kiva portfolio, because that's the preference of those Kiva crowdfunders. And we're going to address this is a very academic stuff. So we are going to address the fact that Kiva partnership happens over the years in multiple rounds. So they are not one shot. Some partner in 2006 and 2007, 8, 9, etc. follow on. So we have to properly address this with a stack regression approach. We are going to try to do our best to formulate a final data set into what is a standard triple difference regression. Right, so this is the regression. Importantly, the third difference. So treat and post, these are standard DID. This one is the third difference, where this is a dummy that takes one if the MFI have over 22% of their assets actually funded by this Kiva crowdfunding platform. So the idea is to say, hey, maybe the partnership in itself is not exogenous. So you have selection issues about whether you choose to partner or not partner with Kiva. But on the other hand, this Kiva take-up rate, this third difference is not within the MFI's control. Because once you post on the Kiva crowdfunding platform, it is up for the crowdfunders to decide whether they should give money to the loans that you just posted. So this one offers an additional layer of protection against endogeneity concerns, and that's the primary motivation for why we are doing these triple differences. We are running through some sort of like revisions where we do something that is similar to Professor Gargano's the IVDID strategy. So it's basically different ways to ensure that we get as close to a exogeneity restriction as possible. Right? So this third difference is going to protect us against some endogeneity concerns. That if we got time, we can talk about those in more detail later. So these are graphs that are just reiteration of what has happened in the preview of findings. If you see that these are portfolio at risk 30 days, and the blue ones are actually the treated units, and the warmer color ones is actually the control units. So you see that after partnering with Kiva, they have an increase in portfolio risk, they have an increase in delinquency and non-performing loans. So the tables are just the same as the figure, right? We are plotting the estimates from this table. We have higher labor costs per loan, right? So these are the payrolls. Number of loans handled by each officer. You see that drops. So after the partnership, let's say before the officer can handle probably I would say 12 loans in a year, and now that number drops to a lower number. I forget the exact estimates. But the gist is that it takes more labor input into servicing each loan after this crowdfunding partnership. And the reason, our speculation is that the reason is actually more difficult to find suitable clients that fit the mandate from Kiva crowdfunders. So it's very easy in that traditional market to find more male clients that have a better credit profile. And it's easier to just, it's harder to step out of that zone and find new customers that fits a different kind of mandate. So the increase in labor cost is perhaps coming from there. These are the loan turnovers. So you see that despite an increase in the total size of the assets and the total size of the loan portfolio divided by the assets is actually going down. So for the amount of money that you have, you are not able to maintain the same proportional amount of loan portfolio. So the utilization rate actually goes down. So these are the three financial costs of doing this crowdfunding partnership and having this social preference on female financial inclusion. Are these costs worth it? So we find that in the 4 regions that report below average female borrower share, there is actually a marked improvement in female borrower share after this crowdfunding partnership in MFIs that actually partner with Kiva compared to MFIs that partner with Kiva but receive a low funding from Kiva. So these are the control and treatment units. So there is a marked improvement in female financial inclusion in that particular sample where female financial inclusion is historically below average. Right? In the full sample and also in this sample where this is really just South Asia and East Asia, female financial inclusion is already high and we don't see any improvement over there. These are robustness, and I'll check the time again. So an important concern is, well, how do we define the third difference? I just briefly mentioned that it's like there is a 22% threshold. And why is that? I mean, that's the top quintile of, statistically speaking, that's the top quintile cutoff in the sample. But for robustness, we also try to vary, let's say we go from 32% somewhere all the way down to 12%. And when we change the threshold and define our third difference accordingly, what are the changes to our main results? So these are the main results that we have. And you see that, of course, we will have a stronger effect when our threshold is higher. But within a reasonable range of thresholds, our results are qualitatively similar. So a concern is that, maybe there is a very ambitious, executive at the MFI, and they just want to increase the size of the MFI as much as possible. Right, so this empire building incentive would jointly determine their decision to partner with Kiva and the subsequent increase in asset size and the deterioration in financial performances. Right, so to test whether that hypothesis is true or not, we provide some sort of evidence. So a key prediction from there is that the spending, right, the increase in operating expense should be pronounced if empire building is indeed a motive behind this Kiva partnership. We find very little evidence that operating expense scaled by either asset or gross loan portfolio or revenue have any sort of like significant and substantial increase after the partnership. So at least from this table, we do not find good support for the empire building story. Opposite to the empire building, I mean, the managers at MFI can have different incentives. They may prefer to live a quiet life. They may prefer to just be left alone and do nothing. And having Kiva is a good way to do that because Kiva absorbs the default risk from the MFIs. So you don't have to be as responsible in screening and monitoring the borrowers. So we test that hypothesis as well. Right? So if that is the case, then we should see that for in regions where MFIs actually get to live a quiet life, for example, when they have high market share and they have high market power, then they can afford to live a quiet life. And if the quiet life hypothesis is true, we should find stronger result in those regions for MFIs in those regions. We basically separate, and this sample is going to be about half the size that only includes MFIs from regions where they presumably have high market power, proxied by their market share in their respective markets, right? So in these regions, we see that, these results are very much comparable to our main result. So if the quiet life hypothesis is true, then we should see that these results should diminish in this sample. But then the fact that these are very much comparable with the main sample tells us that, at least the quiet life hypothesis is not the driving force behind our findings. So a quick summary of what we find. So Kiva is a crowdfunding platform. It's a US-based crowdfunding platform that attracts global crowdfunders that want to improve female financial inclusion. And after partnering with Kiva, these local MFIs, they have 4 distinct outcome changes. The first three are financial. They have more non-performing loans. They have higher labor cost per loan. They have lower asset utilization rates, primarily due to the fact that it's costly, it's financially costly to find the ideal clientele to exert Kiva crowdfunders' preferences. But as a benefit, we do indeed see that Kiva achieved what it has promised, which is to improve female financial inclusion in regions where the Kiva crowdfunders are sending money to. So it's a costly financial inclusion. And I think speaking more generally, this particular crowd is very interested in promoting female financial inclusion. But we are seeing increasingly traffic in the Kiva platform about green investments, about low carbon, offsetting carbon footprints, and those can be loan projects as well, right? If you think about installing solar panels, if you think about other projects that are more related to climate change, as long as you can find a set of consumers that have more aligned preference, and let them become financiers instead of the conventional banks, if you reduce this misalignment of preferences, then you can achieve similar set of improvements, much like what we document here. So our takeaway message from this is that there is a misalignment between the MPV maximizing bank and the end consumers who actually gets the product. And if we can do anything to reduce this misalignment between incentives, there is some sort of welfare improvement to be made along that process. So that's all I have, and thank you for your attention. I guess we have 5 more minutes.
Just a little broad question perhaps. So when you said the Kiva crowdfunding platform absorbs the losses here,
yes,
is that ultimately then passed on to the investors?
Yes.
So it's not really the platform, it's actually the investors who are bearing the loss in this case.
Yes.
So then my natural question is, how does this then play out from a mid to longer term perspective? If you kind of look at the same MFIs, because you start to see a certain pattern in terms of defaults, so that will actually then impact the future cash flows flowing into these MFIs. Is that something?
Yes, that's a really good question, because we do have these cases where the default rate at MFI level is really high, and after a certain amount of time, the partnership just gets terminated. So Kiva users are saying, hey, you are defaulting all the time, right? And you are charging already a pretty high interest rate. That's the case in microfinance. So the Kiva platform would decide, hey, this is not, you are doing something that is beyond our control. We are going to terminate the partnership. But to your question, yes, the end users, the Kiva funders, they absorb the default loss if there's some unfortunate circumstances and the entrepreneurs cannot repay the loan. So from the MFI perspective, this is actually, if you're from the finance crowd, this is a credit default swap. Yeah. So they are absorbing the default risk for the MFIs for free. Right? So for MFI, this partnership really provides really low cost capital for them to run their operation. And that's the draw for those MFIs. And the cost that they pay is that they have to have a more proper journaling process. They have to do a very detailed report about the entrepreneur, right? Take photos, journal what they do a very consistent quarterly update about how the loan is doing. So these are all costs that you have to pay at the MFI level. So this is the trade-off that MFI faces when they consider joining the Kiva platform. And then once that trade-off is considered, you also have this lender-borrower matching that happens on the platform, right? And we have a companion paper that is talking about the on-platform matching, right? The lender preferences, when they look at the information about borrowers, right? Their profile pictures and their description about the loans, right? What kind of thing do they prefer? And that's a separate paper that we think that there are a lot of interesting things going on in this entire process, which is complicated. But this project is going to deliver the message that this trade-off it achieves the Kiva crowdfunders' preference at a financial cost. Right. So that's the paper.
A quick question on the methodology, perhaps. In the control group matching, I was just wondering. So you had a number of different quantitative factors like the size of the asset pool, the loan default rate, etc. Is there something that you looked at from a qualitative perspective as well in terms of the mission and purpose of these MFIs? Because that's going to be a bit harder to match, but that will actually have a bearing in terms of the cash flow and other things.
Right. So Kiva actually said something themselves about how they find and decide partners. Right. Their approach is actually fairly quantitative. So they use the same data set that we use. Oh, sorry. So that's my time up. They use the same set of data sets, which is not public before 2019, but now we're in 2025, so I can get access to the data. They use the same characteristics that I mentioned here, and there are previous literature talking about how those 6 matching variables are important to determine Kiva partnership. I mean, of course, they also look at the culture and also the mission of those MFIs. Those are a little bit more difficult to fit into a regression. Right. But we do. If you refer to the paper, which is available on SSRN, we have an appendix where we show the Kiva checklist for whether they should partner with an MFI. So they provide this checklist to the MFI before the MFI can apply for a partnership. They are saying, hey, we are looking for this kind of values in you, and whether you have this, you can consider applying and partner with us. So you will have a screenshot of that. But in the data, we are not really able to incorporate that into our matching processes. So that's all from me, and thank you for your questions and your time.